2 summers ago, I wrote a memoir about my experience at Brookwood camps in the 1970s. It was a great way to relive those moments. I thought it would be fun to hear other camp stories. So join me as we go back to the bunks. Long before Adam Sandler was given the moniker the Sandman, it was a different Sandler whose literal job involved making sure some 400 individuals were going to sleep, thus making Perry Sandler the original Sandman. I was thrilled to sit down with Perry to discuss his camp career. You got it now?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, perfectly.
Okay.
Great, we got there. We took the scenic route, but we're here. All right. So from Grand Sachem to current role of Grandpa, how are you? It's great to see you.
Yeah. I don't remember your beard, though.
Yeah, I didn't have one until the age of 20 something, but yeah, that's pretty new. That's a result of COVID. So you still look as though you can lace up your Converse and take the hot corner against the Eldred All-Stars, I have to tell you.
Well, I was playing racquetball up until I was about 79, but my shoulders went out, and now I have to use a cane occasionally when I walk, especially when I'm outside.
Wow. Yeah, no, as my dad used to say, you got to pay to play. So
yeah. It's a tough maturation process.
Yeah. So there's so much to cover, and I appreciate your time. So I'll launch right in. The 1960s, you're a group leader in Kiwa. I know that from speaking to Zwilly last week. But
Right.
What year did you start at Kiwa? What did you start as? How old were you when you started?
Well, my first year at Kiwa was 1956 summer. I was the counselor in one of the groups. I think it was the cadets. I became a group leader a few years later, and then Kiwa was sold
Right.
to a religious organization, and Bob Feinglass, who was the head counselor and the sort of director at Kiwa, hooked up with Brookwood. Bert Manhoff, another group leader that was pretty high named, he went to Camp Roosevelt, and he took a whole bunch of people.
So the integrations happened mostly with Roosevelt and Brookwood, and you went with Bob to Brookwood, and he became the director of Brookwood at that
Yes.
time, and you were a group leader at Brookwood, and that's 1964.
Correct.
Got it. Okay. So 1967, you become the head of boys camp at Brookwood.
Correct.
Is that correct? So were you the guy making the announcements in the morning? Was that a thing?
Yeah. Well, as a head counselor, I probably did it. To be honest, I don't remember exactly. I didn't play the record. Somebody else did that. But I had been a group leader of the senior boys up until that point, and then I became the boys' head counselor.
So did Jay Sachs succeed you as boys' head counselor?
When I became director, you want to hear the story about how that happened?
Yeah, actually, it's going to lead me into, I know you took it in 69. So, but, and you're a guy in your mid to low 30s at that point, correct?
I was about 30. I was born in 35.
So yeah, you're in your 30s, and now you take over as director.
Yeah.
So
What happened was Bob Feinglass became the director of Brookwood, and he tried to purchase the camp, Brookwood. And I was very close to Bob, and I always told him, if you ever want to go into buying a camp, I want to go with you. But he didn't include me. And what happened was the deal fell through, and they offered the Katimsky-Tuckman people who owned the camp, Brookwood, offered me the chance to purchase it. I couldn't I told Bob I was very disappointed in him because he didn't let me know what was going on. He ended up going to Camp Tagola as director. And what happened is, because I couldn't get enough financial backing to buy Brooklyn on my own, I became the director. So they hired me as director in 69.
Oh, so Kutimsky and Tuckman maintains ownership and they approach you to take over as director after Bob moves on to Tagola?
Correct.
And that first summer of 69, did you have to do the home recruiting before the summer started?
Yes.
So now that's new to you at this point, correct? So how did that all come about? Do you remember your first home visit?
I don't remember my first one, but I remember many. And, there was no GPSs in those days.
Right.
So, yeah, I got lost in New Jersey a couple of times with directions and so on. But I used to go recruiting. And, I knew what it was because basically I'd spoken to Bob Feinglais many times about, being a director and so on. I sort of got my education in camping from Kiwa.
Right.
I learned everything from Kiwa, and mostly from guys like Bob Feinglais and Bert Manhart. The owners of Kiwa, I didn't have that much contact with. There was one owner named Izzy, but he was always in the background on his scooter.
So you work all day at that point as, for the Board of Ed. You're a principal back then or teaching?
I graduated from Hunter College in 1956. I majored in geology, but in 1954, I worked as a counselor in a camp in Pennsylvania, Camp Cahagan. That was my first camping experience as an adult. I did go to camp when I was 10, 11, 12, or 13. Camp Nashopa in Blue Beach. And that was my introduction to camping from a kid from Brooklyn, near Greenpoint, Brooklyn. And at Cahagan, I was a counselor, just a general counselor. And after that, I didn't go back until a few of us from Hunter, 3 or 4 guys, ended up at Kiwa. And I also, when I graduated, I went to the University of Tennessee to go for my master's in geology. And after one semester, I said, I don't want to waste my dad's money, my mom's money. I went to Texas to see if I could get a job in geology. And I ended up becoming a geophysicist in Texas for a while. Sounds great, geophysicist. What I did was interpret onto maps TNT activity to find synclines and anticlines for where possible oil deposits were. I ended up getting a job with Bayreuth Well Logging Company, which was a subsidiary of National Lead Company at the time. And I did, this was like from February to the summer. Now, when I was on an oil well in Falfurrias, Texas, not too far from McAllen, Texas, and I had to climb to the top of this oil well, like you see if you watch the streaming thing, land. It's a new thing that's on.
Landman with Philly Bob Thornton. Yeah.
And that was me going up one of those derricks. And it was a Saturday night in Falfurrias, Texas. Can I use any kind of language?
Oh, yeah.
At the top of the oil well, and I said, Perry Sandler, Jewish kid from Brooklyn. What the are you doing here? I came down. I called a friend of mine. First, I called Bob Feinglais. And I said, Bob, do you have a job for me? I want to come to camp. This was like beginning of June. He said, sure, come on up. I had a friend named Joel Frank. He's still a friend of mine all these years. And I called him, and I told him to send me a telegram out to the side of the oil well saying it was a problem at home and I have to come home immediately. So that it was like a movie. I got this telegram at the oil site and I gave my down face. Anyway, I took a leave of absence, came back and went to camp.
That's incredible. Who knew that story? That's incredible.
And because of camp, after camp was over that summer, I was probably the 8 best weeks I had many years. And at that time it was 8 weeks. I started looking for jobs for different areas and I really didn't get anything. A friend of mine was a phys ed instructor at a YMHA in Yonkers. And he told me, go ahead and see if you get a job. You know, you're a pretty good athlete and you work with kids all the time. And I ended up getting a job as the assistant director of physical education at the YMHA Heck House in Boston. And actually, because of camp, I went into teaching. So after a couple of years in Boston, I ended up coming back to New York and getting a job, getting my master's at Columbia in physical education. I got a job with my first phys ed job was the Manhattan Day School, a Jewish religious school in Manhattan. And then I ended up with the Board of Ed, passed the test, and became a phys ed teacher. As a substitute, after a couple of weeks, I ended up at my school, which I lasted for 35 years. I became assistant principal in 71 and principal in 86 in my school.
So you're working all that time while director of Brookwood and doing the home visits. So you're at work all day, and now you have to go out on the road in the dead of winter to anywhere in the tri-state area. How do you stay motivated? Or was it, how many oh, shit, I have to do this again moments are there? Or were you just jazzed because it was leading to the summer? What was that like each night?
It wasn't too bad. During the week, I didn't have, I would have one, possibly couple of nights. After working in school, I would go to my office, the camp office, and get all my paraphernalia, make my phone calls, and set up my appointments. And as I said, in those days, how to get directions. There were all referrals, people that were interested from other campers who had been there, and so on. And there was some days, like our Sundays, where I would have, if I go to New Jersey, South New Jersey, I would have maybe 3 or 4 appointments the same day. I go from one house to the other. And I remember one day I signed up 9 new campers. It was like an amazing thing. But no, I enjoyed meeting the people in their homes. Eventually, I had a nice set of slides, which I don't remember coming to your house, but I remember coming to a lot of homes where I showed the slides and told them that this is the place to come for the summer. And I knew I had a lot of competition because a lot of the camps were all people coming to the home.
Sure.
Nowadays, do it differently.
Right. And in the new role, what was the biggest learning curve for you? So you take over as director. What becomes the biggest learning curve where you're like, oh, I don't know how prepared I am for this?
Well, I always like working with kids. And I always had a pretty good rapport with adults. I felt that, I had the tools to become a leader and then so on. But I knew my subject. I knew my camp. And I had my idea of when kids came to Brookwood that what I wanted to have for them. I wanted them to be in an atmosphere where they learn how to live with other people, They had learned skills where they were going to have fun, and all this in a safe and wonderful educational environment. And that kept me up. When I signed up kids, I didn't have any ownership. I was on salary with a expense account, but I enjoyed just getting the 300 kids up to 400 kids in that case.
And was it an adjustment taking on, you had boys camp as the boys head counselor. You grew up, pretty much in boys camps, and now you take on girls and boys camps, the Brookwood camps. So was that an adjustment period, or, were there differences in how you navigated and led both boys camp versus girls camp?
Well, basically, I had Jay Sachs become my head counselor, who was my assistant group leader when I was a group leader. So Jay was my perfect fit there. On girls' side, I, at the time, inherited a girls' head counselor, and it took a couple of summers for me to get the kind of person that I want running the girls' camp. But there was no big problem. I had very good group leaders. The people that I hired on both boys and girls were very good with kids and so on. So I really didn't have that much of a problem doing that because I had good people assisting me.
Was that Burzak that took over?
Steve Burzak came from Kiwar also. Him and his wife were group leaders.
Marcia, right?
Yeah. The riflery counselor too, which we cut out riflery. But before he was the girls' head counselor, there were a couple other people before him, and then I hired him to take over there.
So
I had 3 head counselors, because the teen camp had a head counselor also. There was a special girls' teen camp, separate entity.
And how long until you were truly comfortable in that role? Like you take over in 69, was it that summer you hit your stride, or do you feel like, on a certain summer you just hit your stride and it became a little more of an autopilot kind of ordeal?
No, never felt it was autopilot. That was the summer of rainfall. We had so much rain that summer. It was difficult scheduling. I always wanted, to have the kids out to activities. So we had a lot of indoor activities. We used local movie houses and so on. It was a terrible thing with the weather. However, I had no problem coordinating the activities of all 3 camps because I had Jay with me plus 2 other people that I inherited the teen camp person at the time, but I wasn't that happy with, and eventually I got somebody new. I didn't feel. It was also the summer of the festival in upstate New York with the music festival.
Oh, Woodstock.
Yeah, and we had to worry about people coming on campus from that overflow there.
What were there any issues that year?
Well, one time I had some people come on, but we ran a pretty tight ship, and I had people to help me make sure that nobody ventured into the camp who didn't belong.
Interesting. Wow. And how would you characterize your leadership style those years specifically?
I try to be inclusive and having my people. I met with my head counselors every evening right before dinner. So I had an agenda that I had for them to carry out for the next day or that evening and the next day. A lot of people thought I was very strict. That was the thing. The number of people used to tell me that it's tough working for you, but I would love to send my kids to be with you. In other words, they had a difficult time with my strictness, but they knew if they had kids coming, their
They'd
kids
be
would.
in good hands.
So I would say it was an all-encompassing 24 hours a day because I was up on campus sometimes to 1, 2 in the morning when counselors came back
Hmm.
after curfew to make sure they were coming back not inebriated and not doing anything that was negative with the kids in their bunks.
And who were your confidants? Were they the heads of the boys girls camp? Because you don't have a peer per se on in Brookwood. You know, you're the one director. Everybody else pretty much has a peer. So who were your confidants?
Well, I gotta say, Jay Dax. There was another fella that was one of my counselors when I was a group leader, Andy Raffay. Uh, I eventually had other group leaders. My group leaders were pretty strong once I hired them all. I recruited a number of group leaders from another camp that nearby, and they became my strong staff. And basically, that was it. Also, I worked with one of the owner's son, Jack Zuckerman, who was my liaison to the family, quote unquote, the Katemsky-Tuckman family.
And did you have relationships with any other camp directors?
Not initially. I had another camp try to recruit me a couple of years after I was there to come in as a part owner. I know you spoke to Richie Kamen.
No, I didn't. Willie spoke to. I haven't spoken to Richie in years.
Oh, I thought you had a pod with him.
No, no, no.
Well, Richie Kamen ended up owning a camp too. And Richie became one of my group leaders. And my leadership always included training people as a camp director or as a head counselor, training group leaders. When I became a director, I tried to train other people to become head counselors and so on, to develop into more of a leadership role. So basically, I met with other camp directors at camp conventions, and for a while, when Camp Kiwa had closed, I met a couple of the camp directors who were trying to recruit me because of the amount of kids they thought I might follow me into their camp. But other than that, there was more of a competition. There were 3 other camps in the area, so I knew those directors, but I knew them more from inter-camp games. Didn't discuss business, really. Didn't discuss recruiting, because we were sort of competing with each other.
And which camp did you see as the most direct competition at the time?
It's interesting. It wasn't the camps that were nearby. Other camps like Trails End and Tyler Hill, they were on what I felt on our level.
Are those Pennsylvania camps?
They happened to be Pennsylvania camps. And they had top-notch directors also. Now, I knew those two I knew Tyler Hill's director pretty well, because his son-in-law was a teacher in my school and actually became one of my assistant principals. So.
Well, that's interesting. And then, you mentioned Katimsky and Tuckman. Were they hands-off as owners? And if so, were there any non-negotiables where they said, look, it's your show, but one thing that's important to us is...
Well, what I learned after I got to Brookwood, Katimsky and Tuckman were the caterers at Kiwa, which I didn't know at that time. That's how the connection came with the Kiwa people in Bar 5 lives. But my contact was Mr. Tuckman. He was a grand old man, a very nice guy. He was a really good guy. His wife was called the Barracuda because she was tough and everybody was afraid of her. But I got along very well with her. But they let me run the camp. In fact, I put a pool in teen camp. They didn't ask me upkis. I got the pool put in with whatever cost it cost. They didn't step in any way. They let me run the camp because when I took over, the camp had maybe 275 to 300 kids. I built it up to 400 kids.
So I'm sure it was a two-way street. It was they appreciated you and you appreciated being able to do your own thing.
And basically, everything was smooth up until the last couple of years I was there.
And then on any given year, what percentage of campers would you say you knew by name and face? Would you really, I mean, it's now you're up to 400 kids. Like when they hit camp, any given time, how many do you actually know by face and name?
At Kiwa, the owner was a funny guy, Izzy. He would talk to a kid and he would go look in the back of their shirt for their native tears. I didn't have to do that. First of all, at that time, every kid that I recruited, I remembered the house they were in. Mm. Why, when I said, I don't remember coming to your home, my memory is not as sharp as it used to be. But that's how I remember things. I remember when kids were in Fort Lee, New Jersey, or anywhere. I could picture their home. And during the days in camp, I would be around during the day. I would be going to activities on all three campuses. I'd make my rounds and so on. And that's where I would keep aware of what's going on. Now, of course, the kids that were real problems and kids that were homesick cases came to my attention much more. And then, of course, when video came in and I had Rick Greenberg, my video guy, he was a group leader who I also eventually got into my school, who developed a TV station in my school. So we used to take videos of kids, and especially with the homesick kids, when they get on a phone. There were no phone calls allowed the first few days of a week. But when the kids were at activities, he would videotape these kids who were supposedly homesick. And then a few times when parents would come up thinking they're taking their kids home, we would show them the video and how happy the kids were. And they would go back home without even seeing their kids. Hmm. But I got to know most of the kids at camp. And to this day, I still keep in touch with an awful lot on Facebook.
That's incredible. That's really nice. And then, the toughest situation you had to deal with in the years that you were director, is there any one come to mind?
Yeah. The drug problem. That was through a number of years. There's mostly marijuana, I was worried. And, drinking with the counselors, watching to make sure that they didn't come back drunk. And I would tell the kids on the first night of camp, I would go to all the groups, the camp waiters, the CITs, the girls, CITs, and a place called Kitty Castle, KK.
Yep.
And I would tell them, I know some of you may have brought stuff to camp, and there's no ifs, ands, and buts. If you're caught with it, you're going home, and your parents are going to lose their tuition. So if you have anything, don't say he's not going to catch me, because I've caught people in this was after the first summer too, mm-hmm. Previous summers. Some of them went right home. And that was it. And then when a few of the kids over the years didn't listen to my advice, and it was tough to have to send them home. Sometimes in cases when they were, okay kids, very good kids, but they didn't listen, and I had to maintain the reputation of the camp.
Right. Now, so, you mentioned two things that kind of spark a little memory. When the homesick kids, do you remember hearing about me in my first year being one of those homesick kids?
I didn't really remember that. You are?
Yeah.
So how was it cured?
You know, that wasn't the year, oddly enough, that I ended up going home, because the year I went home, I was in Varsity Hall, which was a great year. But I
Yeah.
came back, I went home for about 3 days and then came back. But, that was it. But I don't really,
Was your sister in camp with?
yeah. So that was 71. Yeah, my sister was there, but she was in KK. So, she had her thing. And I had two cousins in camp too. Danny and Phyllis Swick were there my first year.
But Danny was one of my good campers. And
So,
he plays second base on softball team, but he wasn't a good fast runner. And on the basketball court, he was a little slow too. But he was a good guy. And Phyllis, of course, was a very nice young lady.
and, if you had a day that you could do over because you would like to do something differently than you did that day, or you want to relive it because it was such a great day, is there a day that pops out for you, or is there
I would say that the days that more than one day, the breaking of color war, those things that we did from helicopters, from planes dropping leaflets, things like that. That was very exciting. And also the end of the tribe war competition, the Gitchy
the
Goomies.
Gitch? Oh, yeah.
The Gitchy Goomies were exciting. I used to try to run with someone with the participants, but those were exciting things. And of course the last night's banquet.
Mm-hmm.
That was very sentimental, and it was sad because I was going back to a life which I enjoyed less than the 8 weeks that I was at, even as director.
And I'm surprised you don't remember Casa Yacker on Bachelder Street in Sheepshead Bay. It wasn't one of the memorable homes you got to visit.
I don't remember Sheepshead Bay too much. Do you remember?
Oh, me? Yeah. Well, I grew up there, so.
No, I
yeah.
mean, you remember the night I came.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I wrote it when I wrote about that. Yeah, I absolutely 100%. Yep. That's a big, but I'm one of many for you. You're one of one for me when you come in that evening. So yeah, of course, it kind of jump started the whole thing. And in terms of tribe war chiefs and color war generals, who picked them? Was that a committee or was that solely you? And what criteria, if any, was used?
That was solely me. I did that, as well as the patches that you guys got from color war, and tribe war wasn't hard because those came out right away. But to keep the names secret of the color war teams, I had to order the patches way in advance. Now, to choose the color war, the tribe war generals, chiefs, I picked what I thought were guys and girls who had leadership qualities, who the kids admired, looked up to, and who they could command the respect of the counselors who would be on their teams. So that's what I did there. But I chose them, and then I would grab them and bring them into a spot and tell them what they were going to do. And it was all very secretive. Now with the patches, I had to order them in advance. So one of my campers, Harvey Green,
was my first counselor.
Harvey Green, okay. Well, his father was the camp doctor, and his mother was at crafts. She was the one that designed the patches, and she was the only one besides me who knew the names of the color war teams before color war broke. And we kept that pretty secret. I don't even think she told her husband. He probably wasn't interested. But, Harvey, um, his mom had these patches. I had the company make them. We hold them and so on. And that's the way the patches came about. And the color war generals were even more secretive than the tribe war because that was the end of the year.
Sure.
And there were basically 4 people, 2 on each side, girls and boys. And I got people that were very popular, strong leaders, and very good with staff and kids.
And I know you spoke a little earlier about you recruited some counselors from a neighboring camp. Did you look for counselors that specifically could add value to the softball team or basketball team for
Yeah.
counselors?
Well, it happens at Camp Dalmaqua, we used to have a lot of inter-camp rivalry with them. And they had some good ball players, but they were also really good guys, I felt. And I recruited guys like Richie Kamen, Mike Hipsher, and a few others that came over, and they ended up being great group leaders for Brookwood.
Yeah, they were legends. Richie was my group leader for the first 2 years. I mean, I couldn't have asked for a better experience.
I mean,
And
he was also a very good softball pitcher.
yeah, the windmill pitch, which leads me to my next question for you. If you were to pick 3 first ballot Hall of Famers from the counselor softball teams and the counselor basketball teams, you have to exclude yourself as one of the members from the counselor softball team. Who would be your first ballot Hall of Famers? 3 for each.
Well, first of all, when I faced Richie at Thalaqua, the only time when I played softball that I got an intentional walk, he walked me to get to a guy, one of my former teachers, Tony Stavidio, was working at Brookwood. And Tony was a good athlete, college baseball player. And he gave me an intentional walk, just like they had walked the judge.
Right.
But first of all, Cliff Mask, center field. Mike Hipsher, shortstop. Richie Kamen, pitcher.
Those are your 3 for softball?
I would say those are the 3. Although I would also put Alan Kroll at shortstop, also close to Mike.
I remember, and I forget which camp or if it was Eldred, one of them said Richie couldn't do the windmill. They wouldn't play if Richie did the windmill.
Well, he was unhittable. The only game I ever saw him get hit was one time at Camp Ranger. They bombarded him. I don't know what happened. So it was one of the few times we lost.
And then same thing for your
Basketball.
3 first ballot Hall of Famers for basketball.
Jay Wahoftik. I guess we're going to have to do Thunder Thornton. This guy Thornton played for Creighton. He was a big guy. He was only there one summer. So I don't know if he'd make it because of only one summer. But he was a force. He was a Division I star at Creighton University.
Was this in the 60s, late 60s?
I think this was probably beginning of 71. And I'd say Cliff Mast again here.
That makes sense. Yeah.
And he was one of our best athletes. And
those are good. Yeah, the first 2 guys. Jay, as Willie had mentioned, when I asked him for the all-time starting 5, he mentioned Jay, and I believe he said Jay had a try out with the Nets, the New York, when they were in Long Island, the New York Nets.
Yeah, he played for Niagara originally, and then he went on to the Nets. And he played when we used to get the Knicks to come up.
Mm-hmm.
He played one-on-one with this guy, Brian, and he outplayed him one-on-one. I remember that.
Amazing. And what was your actual last year at Brookwood?
I think it was 78. I'm I think 78 was when I tried to buy. Well, first of all, a couple of times before that, I tried to buy Brookwood. And around 1973, the deal that fell through with me buying in 69, I was going to buy it with one of the family sons, Alan Kane. It was Alan Kaminsky, Katimsky, but he changed his name to Kane, and he was going to be my partner. And when they wanted to get this together, they wanted 51% of the camp. And I said, no, it's got to be 50-50. And then he backed out. That's what they offered me, the directorship. Then in 1973, we tried again. And I had a possible deal that fell through again. And I kept looking around where I had a friend that worked for me at camp, Shelley Levine, who, by the way, also taught in my school, was a dean, and he was one of my closest friends. He became a teen camp head counselor eventually. He started out as the camp driver, one of the camp drivers but he was also a confidant of mine during my tenure there. But it ended up that I was contacted by Ralph Hirsch, one of the owners of Wakanda, and said he wants to sell out. Would I be interested? And that became the reason for my leaving Brookwood, because I couldn't make a deal to buy Brookwood, but I was able to buy into Wakanda.
And then one of the final questions I have for you, because I know you've been very generous with your time, is who plays you in the Brookwood movie? I know the perfect person, but I want to hear yours first.
Never thought about it. Had to give up on that.
I'll go with John Hamm.
John Hamm. It's pretty good. Pretty good.
Could see it. So I want to share a quick anecdote with you. When I know after I wrote the memoir about the summer sun, about my experience at Brookwood, Zwilly had texted me and he said, Perry read your book and he wants to talk to you. And at that moment, I became that scared, timid, 10, 11-year-old boy again. I was like, oh no, he knows the code I had with my parents now. He sees the letter published I wrote about, coming to get me. So I told Rhonda Yacker, expecting her to say, why, what are you scared of? And instead she replied, yeah, he always scared me too. So it was a true brother and sister day moment right there when we shared that.
I got the older kids. I think that they would just, worried about my finding something wrong or, coming down on them for some reason. But I think I had a pretty good relationship to them.
You did. No, it's all said with great love and admiration, but I really can't thank you enough for your generous time in this conversation today. Can honestly say still a little scared. No, just kidding. It's very generous of you to do this, and hopefully can continue on and have great conversations that you could listen to and enjoy hearing people share their stories and memories of what you created, because it truly was something special. So on that, I'll just wish you to be well, take good care, and it was really great speaking with you.
I appreciate it, and I thank you, Steve.
All right.
Say hello to Rhonda for me.
Absolutely will do. All right, Perry. Thanks again.